coming soon or whatever, but it's live.
Let me turn my mic on. Now they can see and hear me.
Yay!
There we are. Hello, people.
Hello, everybody.
I'm
Can you hear us
assuming there's
okay?
people. Yeah, there's a few folks. It's not just the three of us. The three of us only make up half of the people that are currently on the stream. Did I ever retweet myself? That's what I meant to do that.
I retweeted you.
Yeah, but I did. I normally do it myself because I have more followers.
Your mic is, Jeff. Your mic is interesting.
What's interesting about my mic?
It sounds out of phase.
Oh, on the stream?
Dar Jr. just said sound is great.
Well, go listen. Yeah,
Scipio
it
said
sounds
sound
like
is
I'm
sweet.
wearing my headphones, and it sounds like you're behind me.
That sounds like a setting on your end because I don't have an issue.
It's impossible to hear
Listeners
now.
are not having an issue.
We're all echoing all over the place.
I mean, I sound fine and you sound fine, Sam.
Yeah, but Jeff sounds fine to me, and we all sound fine on the stream.
It sounds fine to me on the stream, too. So,
okay.
It all seemed to be in sync. I don't know. Nobody's complaining.
Nope.
So, it's just you. Deal with it.
All right. I'm good. I mean, I don't even listen to the stream.
All right. Let me pull up my stopwatch. So, we're ready to go. Mike gets 30 minutes and everybody else gets 5, right?
What's the order?
Yeah, that sounds right. 30. Only 30?
Mike is first, and then you, and then me.
Okay. Mike and I's are going to meld together because, yeah.
Right. Because you're both running similar things. Let me try out this thing here where I'm... Okay, I have hit record on the other monitor. Figuring out how this works. The mouse that will only go back and forth to the other screen when I'm on the Finder on the desktop. It won't do it when I'm in an app. It's weird. Who are you making friends with now?
TK373, a Pixar animator. Yeah. Who's apparently been enjoying stuff.
So when are we going to get that Pixar D&D movie I've been clamoring for?
Good luck with that. There's some D&D movie. Everybody's all excited about it. I go to movies are good after I've seen them, and I know that they're good. Otherwise, I have no idea if they're going to be any good.
Well, that's the way these things work, right? All right. Should we get going? I'm recording, and all right. So, welcome to Behind the DM Screen. We are 3 DMs helping each other out and talking about our games, and not necessarily in that order. I don't know what I'm doing. It is May of 2021, and my script is literally 5 bullet points. So this is how this show goes. We are off the cuff, and we are doing it live. So, Mike, Sam, say hi.
Yo. Hello.
Hello.
So that's Mike and Sam. I'm Jeff. Mike, you're up first.
45
minutes on the clock. So you go ahead and get started, and I'm going to take a nap. Let me know when you're done, and we'll go from there.
Oh, boy. So I've been having a really great time with Rime of the Frost Maiden. And something that I've enjoyed thoroughly is that the adventure gives you lots of room to sort of add your own stories. And Sam knows this too, that like Sam added a whole arc with Torog. I've added a whole arc with some support from Sam's DM's Guild product on this with the Cult of Oral that I've referred to as the Children of Oral, because no one refers to themselves as a cult. And I threw on another cult on top of that called the Cult of Thrun.
What about the Blue Oyster Cult?
No, that's for some other campaign.
They refer to themselves as a cult.
Yeah, they all right. The Blue Oyster Cult. They all killed themselves, right? And don't kill the Reaper. Don't fear the Reaper.
Anyway, we're taking away your time. Go ahead.
They don't fear the Reaper anymore. So so I added a Cult of Thrun on top of it, which is like an elder evil that I'm taking from that I'm taking from Robert Schwab's Elder Evils book
I didn't
for
remember
3.5.
Thrune, so that's why.
There isn't a Thrune. So Thrune is only mentioned offhand in the adventure with no real connection. I am replacing an Elder Evil in the book Elder Evils called Father Limac with Thrune. And then I made a Father Limac who is a priest of Thrune and put that in. So I kind of added this whole thing, sort of an Elder Evil. It has cool Frost Maideny sort of ties, like it's frozen in the ice. It was put there by
and
elves
Thrune is from
kind of things like that.
Schwab's thing, or
so Thrune is mentioned. No, so the name Thrune is mentioned in Dugan's Hole.
Okay.
In Frost Maiden. I took an Elder Evil called Father Limac and renamed it to Thrune, and then used pretty much all the rest of it.
Now I'm following.
And it's cool. It adds this like older Elder Evil that isn't quite a god, isn't quite a demon prince, that has influenced the area and has slowly been breaking free during the Endless Night. The Endless Night has caused this thing to break free. So I have all these like subplots going, and of course I'm doing my good duty of like paying attention to the characters and learning about their backgrounds.
Is there
and
internal consistency to that? It seems like the Endless Night would make things colder, and thus it wouldn't break free of the ice.
You would think. For some in the Elder Evils book, it describes the fact that night that night is what, or daylight is what keeps it in check.
Okay, then
right?
that works.
And since the daylight is gone, it's no longer in check. Yeah.
Got it.
So yeah, it seems odd, but it's not actually cold that's holding it. It's light that's holding it. So all of that's been great. I've been adding in character background stuff. You know, one of the characters is a priestess of Illustrae, and so she is actually they found an old Illustrae temple, and she is able to teleport it around. I think I might have mentioned it before that they now have a mobile temple that they can sort of move from Feygrove to Feygrove, and so it's pretty cool. So there's lots of room to add all of this stuff, which is great. Until you realize, like, holy cow, I haven't finished half the quests, and they're already 4th level. And I'm supposed to move on to Chapter 2, but I'm not even really close to done with Chapter 1. And there are elements of Chapter 1 that should be foreshadowed by now and aren't. And then I get back to, like, well, when was I supposed to do this? Like, how am I supposed to add these
XP?
quests? No, the book doesn't.
So just stop leveling. Why are you leveling up so fast?
So explain why you stopped leveling. Like, what sense does that make in the world? Right. We just say it, and you know what players love? Hey, you're not going to level. Yeah, no,
my players just about had a minor revolt when they didn't level for a while.
Yeah. So that's kind of what happened in this one. I told them they're going to level slow, and I still got them, but like, it's been 6 weeks and we haven't leveled. And we're
6 weeks isn't that long, but
so
okay.
I leveled them. It's 6 weeks, I'm playing every week,
me too.
Right? So, yeah, well, they want leveling. They like to level faster. So they feel like they've been stuck at level 3.
That's sort of where the game. Right? I mean, that's what the adventures in 5th edition are intended for, faster paced leveling. There's people that talk about playing.
6 weeks for a level does not feel like fast leveling.
Well, compared to you hear stories about people who've been running the same campaign for decades and they level once a year or whatever. Then that's
they're not the norm. I don't.
No, well, no, definitely not.
I don't know what the norm is. I don't know how fast people.
I imagine the norm is. Look at how I imagine the norm is closer to what you're talking about because that's what all the published products do.
Sure, and I don't presume that AL is the standard either. But Adventurers League, you level every 4 hours. Right, for the first year. I think
in my Castles and Crusades game, they're on session 14, and only 2 characters have leveled up to level 2.
Sure, yeah, that's Castles and Crusades. That's different.
Yeah.
How many?
I'm just saying it depends on
because 27 of them died.
No, none of them have died.
Oh wow!
But it depends on the system. Is my point.
Right. I mentioned that leveling was going to be slower, and they haven't complained as much. But the reality is, they want to see these people have played a long time. They've got new toys with Tasha's. They want to kind of see the new stuff happen. Right. And it's disappointing if they go a long time, and it doesn't make sense to them because they're like, we've accomplished a whole lot of stuff. We killed Sefik Kaltro. We defeated the Cult of Oral and Bryn Shander. We've we saved the mine in Tourmaline. We killed we killed Moose
And
Jaws.
they're still
right?
they're still kind of low enough. They're low enough level that like those things matter. Like if they were 12th level and they were doing those things, then it's like, well, yeah, but that stuff doesn't really matter at your power level. So,
sure, right. So that's one problem that I've been running into is like it feels like, and I just checked before the show to say like how fast does the book level you, and there is this big gap between third and fourth level where like first to second level you do one quest, second to third level you do I think it's 3 quests, and then third to fourth is 5 quests, right? So it's a long time.
I
think, or maybe
that's also consistent with how the game is designed though. You're supposed to level up from first to second and the second to third relatively quick. And then it slows down to a normal
first
pace.
To second, yes. Yeah, second to if you're following experience points, you mean?
That's the advice they've been given on leveling up since the beginning. Like one session to get to level 1 and like
they definitely had different advice that they offered up. Yeah, but like
that's the advice that's stuck in my head, and I've always used, and it's worked. Because it's just because low level characters are so squishy, you want to get them through that quick,
Yeah, well, and I think we all agree, and like I don't think anybody, I don't know, I'm sure there's jerks, but like my feeling is like you should get them out of first level as fast as possible so you don't kill them, right? Because it's so easy to kill first level characters, and in reality, and I did kind of screw this up because I didn't realize how Foaming Mugs was going to play out. But I recognize that most of the quests in Chapter 1 are deadly to first level characters. There's only a couple that won't kill them. So I leveled them to second level after like an encounter before they had even started the rest of it. On hindsight, and my recommendation is to start in Bryn Shander, do the Foaming Mugs quest, and level them after the Foaming Mugs quest, which is kind of what the adventure recommends as well, right? It sort of says if you can't pick Bryn Shander, and it's a good central hub. So having like, but then of course, like, so it's great. You've got all this room to add your own stuff, but if you're adding your own stuff, do those count as quests? And if they complete those quests, that means there's a bunch of other quests you're not going to do. So it means there's so much material in Chapter 1.
Well, you're not really intended to do all of it, are you?
So the way, if you look at it, they have about 12 quests, and your intention, they intend for you to do 9 of them, 9 of the 12. So
most of them,
3/4 of it. Yeah, and that's because they have this going from 4th to 5th level, or going from.
But it also says that you can be in Chapter 2 at 4th level, so you actually don't have to complete all those quests.
Yeah, to start Chapter 2, because it's supposed to be kind of a little bit of overlap. So that has been an issue for me, because I'm looking at it and I'm like, I'm kind of I'm kind of ready to move to Chapter 2. I think Sam will say, do it, right? Like there's no reason not to be in Chapter 2. I already know what Sam's going to say because we talked about it earlier today. So, not me being a jerk, but he actually said this stuff. And I listened to what Sam says. He's a smart dude. So, unlike Jeff, but he's really, so.
Agreed. On all counts.
Agreed. You're like, I'm not going to argue that. So that's one issue I've been having is like, yeah, there's lots of room for you to do your own stuff, but you're gonna get rid of the stuff that's in the chapter, or if you're gonna add your own, right? There's not a lot of room to add your own. You're gonna be overloaded with content, right? And then the other problem that I've run into, which I was telling Sam, like my first impression was this adventure is a mess. My second impression was I started running and go, no, it's actually, I was wrong and it's really good. And now I'm back to, no, it really is a mess. Right. And the problem is like I'm a relatively experienced Dungeons and Dragons DM, right? I'm firmly in the middle of the pack of DMs, and I don't know how the hell to run this thing. Right. There's like when am I supposed to put the quests in front of characters? Which quests do I put in front of characters? How many should they have? How do I cycle them out? Right. It talks about that, like these quests are no longer useful, but it doesn't have an exit for them. It doesn't say like, if the characters don't complete this quest, this is what will happen. And then it goes away. Right. And that way there's a way for a quest to leave the log, because the problem I ran into is they went to Goodmead. So this is a 2-part problem. Problem number 1 is that it seems like the order that the players in both the groups that I've run, so my sample size of 2, the way they complete the quest is by which towns they travel to, which means if they're going to go to Sier Koenig from Bryn Shander,
This is where I disagree with you, but go ahead.
Sure. Well, I'm telling you how they did it. So you could disagree, but that's the reality of how they did it. And the way they did it was they went from Bryn Shander to East Haven, because that's on kind of on the path. Then they're going to go to Caer Dineval, and then they're going to Caer Dineval, and then they're going to go to Caer Konig. And what happens is they go to East Haven. They're like, oh yeah, we heard that there's missing fisher folk here. Let's go take a look at that.
Right.
And
so
like, I don't want them to have to deal with that anymore.
Right.
Like,
so let me be clear that what I was disagreeing with wasn't that they actually went to those places. It's that there's no reason why they should be presented with every single clue for every single quest everywhere they go. Like,
right. Sure.
You should cultivate what
they already had. Yeah. So the problem, and this is like, well, then how am I supposed to do it? The book doesn't tell me.
Right. No, and I agree with that part.
Yeah. So what I did is they were in Bryn Shander. They decided to go to Dugan's Hole. When they went to Dugan's Hole and learned that one, then they learned about the quest in Goodmead. So then they went to Goodmead and completed the quest there, at which point they learned about the East Haven quest, because it's adjacent. And they learned about the Caer Dineval quest, because those two are adjacent towns. And I figured if they're adjacent towns, those might be reasonable for them to learn those. But then they said, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to go north because we got to chase Suffolk, or not, we got to chase the murderer. We know the murderer used to be in Dugan's Hole, and then Goodmead, and then Bryn Shander, and now is on the way to Targos. So we're going to head to Targos, right? So then they head to Targos, and I think I mentioned that the Targos quest to them. Oh yeah, there's some explorers that went.
That was your mistake.
Well, right, but like, when the hell else am I going to do it, right? So
then you just leave that quest out, and that's the thing.
Right. Well, the good news is they didn't do that one, and that one has a nice, easy exit, which is, oh yeah, those guys are dead, right? Yeah. Like no one went to go look at them. Turns out we found them, and they're dead. They get eaten by Yetis. So that quest goes away. They did learn about the Bremen quest was actually one of the initial quests that I dropped on, because it was a low level quest. And I said, yeah, that sea monster went away. So whatever sea monster was screwing with the boats, it disappeared. So no one's interested in that anymore. And so that meant I had two quests that came on and then left. Yeah. But then they went to Targos. They missed that quest. Then they went over to Tourmaline. Well, Tourmaline has a cool quest, right? The Tourmaline, the mine. So they did the mine, and then they also had heard about Moose Jaws, and they were excited about Moose Jaws. So I'm not yanking that one. So then they went up and took care of Moose Jaws and the other one. So now, and then of course my own quests kick in. They go back to Bryn Shander. They deal with the Cult of Oral. That took a while, right? It was 3 sessions for them doing that. And now they're heading back, and they're like, oh yeah, we have on our list about those missing fisher folk. And I could have said, yeah, we found them. They're dead. Or we're not really interested. They disappeared, but no one else has disappeared, so we're not worried about it anymore. Right? Except that's a cool quest, and it's got a lot going on with it. And it's, that is the Toil and Trouble quest in East Haven.
They get on the boat and they find the caves, and there's like a hag.
Yeah, they find the caves. They find out there's a hag. They get the thing. And what matters?
That was one of the ones I play tested.
Bowl of Plenty. Yeah, so you get this bowl. You get this, whatever the
cauldron
of plenty, and that can feed like all of 10 towns, or can feed at least one of them, right? And now it's this major element. So you kind of want to do that one. It'd be a shame to lose it. The only problem is that one's also tied to a whole other quest, and there's like a seance thing. So you're looking at probably at least 3 sessions in East Haven, right? And you still haven't introduced Duergar yet, right? And so even though the characters heard about, so now I'm like, I got to get these Duergar involved. And yeah, the Duergar can show up in East Haven, right? So there is a little bit there.
They do. Dirth, Nildar's brother, is actually in East Haven as per the book. It's not that you have to change anything or move anything around. It's that it's already written that he's there.
Yeah, right. So there's options there. But what I run into is I want them to go to Caer Konig and deal with the ghosts in Caer Konig, right? Or what I call the ghosts. It turns out they're invisible Duergar. The problem is they already had, again, because they were adjacent to another town, they had heard about the fact that the town speaker to Caer Dineval has kind of gone missing, was apparently sick and has gone missing, and is now being held, being taken care of by friends in the care. So they're interested, and I wonder what's going on there. And I'm like, hey, that's a great place for more Cult of Thrun people, right? Like, what if there's an older Cult of Thrun group, right? So I don't want to discount that group, but I also don't want them to get involved in that because they just beat a whole other cult. And there's all this other stuff for them to do. The problem is when you put all these juicy hooks in front of them, they're going to bite. And that means they're going to do 26 quests, without getting any levels or anything like that. So and I haven't even gotten into like how the hell I'm going to get them involved in chapter 2, right? And I'm starting to get advice of like which I asked on Twitter today, and I've been talking in the Discord about, which of the chapter 2 locations are really cool and worth seeing. And it seems like the nice thing there is it's not all of them. There's a handful of them that are pretty cool, and then there's a bunch that I can probably skip, and that's good.
I'm curious, Mike, because you've run them both, and I mean, I have my impression of this section of Rime and how I would do it and whatever, but I haven't run it other than some playtest missions. But it's in some ways the Tin Towns and all the quests in Tin Towns doesn't feel significantly different than Curse of Strahd, except that there's 3 towns in Curse of Strahd, and each one has their own parcel of quests, as opposed to 10 different towns that have different quests. So how does one of them work so well for you and the other one is a struggle?
A major, so I think I have to think back, right, because it's been a long time since I've run Curse of Strahd. But one thing was, because you had the prophecy, and the prophecy gave you 3 things you had to acquire and where you had to acquire them, there was drive and direction for the characters ahead of time. And so even though they might get involved in subquests in a particular area, they might go to Valiki and deal with a bunch of craziness in Valiki, they still knew, hey, we're eventually going to have to go to the Wizard of Wines because we know that one of the prophecies.
So the problem that you're having with
they had this other big drive, and they don't have any drive.
The problem with Frostmaiden is that it doesn't have the primary quest for them to focus on.
Okay. Yeah, and my argument is, if you gave them the primary, there is one,
but they
kinda, don't. Right? Like, as I asked Sam, I said, "What's the main goal?" And he said, "There are 3 main goals," which feels like 3. How do you? Can you have 3 main goals, right? Like,
well,
I mean, is the main, right? And so the problem is, the obvious choice is get rid of the Endless Night. So if you were to get rid of the Endless Night, the primary goal, none of the 10 Towns quests matter at all, because none of them had anything to do with that. So if you motivate if the characters are motivated by like stop Oral from causing the Endless Night, why the hell am I helping these stupid dwarves with their metal problem, with the fact that goblins stole their ingots? No one would do that. So what I did, which I think has worked out really well, except it's led to this secondary problem, is that the character's motivation was to help the people of 10 Towns survive the Endless Night. And that means all of the quests are valuable.
Well, and then that also leads to ending it, because ending it is the best way to help them survive it.
Yeah, exactly. And ending it can be one of those. And so same with saving it from Duergar attack. All of the rest of it can help. But if you gave like either the quest of, discover the hidden power that exists beneath Icewind Dale, right? Could be another driver, which is a main part of the book. But if you do that again, like, you're going to do 20 quests that don't matter, right? Nothing matters. But the problem is, if you have this endless quest, if you have this idea of help the people at 10 Towns survive the Endless Night, all these quests are useful. Well, now they're motivated to do every one of them, right? And now they're going to do every one of them, and it's hard to stop from grabbing onto.
This is the kind of stuff that I like to fix. This is the kind of stuff I like to fix in like a set in a campaign to fix in session 0, to give them sort of individual drivers and motivations, but it's hard to know what that needs to be. Like, this is why I like running adventures 3 years after you all do it, so I can figure out what I need to put in the session 0 to fix it.
Well, here's the thing. I'm spending a lot of time on Rime of the Frostmaiden. I'm doing a lot of prep on it. I'm doing a lot of stuff with it, and I still don't have a good recommendation on how to do it. Right? Like, I don't know how I'm supposed to distribute the quests. Right? I'm not sure how I'm supposed to hand them out and when and which direction. Sam and I were talking about, what about a flow chart? Like, it's too bad that there isn't sort of a flow chart that sort of goes through them. And I think if you recall, one of my original ways I was going to do it was groups of 3, that there's like tiers. Right. And then I was going to run it the same way Dragon of Icespire Peak runs, because that one actually runs pretty well, which is, here's your tier 1 quest. The problem is, the way I had those tiers set up was not the location, which means players would be going through different towns to do another quest, right? and they'd skip the stuff that is happening
Right.
in a town. So it was, yeah, it's just it's weird. Like, you know, they're location based quests, and they're kind of described as location based quests, which means the flowchart is the organization of the towns
Right.
physically, right? And that's kind of what I tried again. But then the problem is, yeah, then they backtracked and now they got 7
Right.
quests, right? Because they went to one place, got the neighboring quest, and then decided not to do this. And I realized I'd screwed up as soon as they headed north. And I was like, oh crap, their quest log is full of southern quests.
Well, and
but now they're heading north, and it's about to be loaded up with northern quests.
and you, I mean, and you talked about some of the issue here is that, like, you can very easily just say, well, all of these quests are on a timer. As soon as you find out about them, there's consequences if you didn't prioritize it. Like, it's not an issue if you can do them all. You have to prioritize. Except then you end up skipping some of the ones that they don't know are kind of the cooler ones that you want to make sure to do. So,
right. That's like, I could have skipped the East Haven quest, right? They hated
So,
East Haven
I
very
think
much.
one of the
Death is not a great way to introduce a town.
I think that that your fundamental your fundamental misunderstanding about chapters 1 and 2 is something that I think a lot of people are having as a fundamental misunderstanding, because the book doesn't present it very well, to be perfectly honest. And the fundamental misunderstanding is this: they are not supposed to have every quest laid out before them. It is not necessary for them to accomplish every task. It's not necessary for them to get a task as soon as they enter a town. And the idea of what they're supposed to be doing, there's also, you know, the book gives you that whole set of secrets and backgrounds so that you can seed in things and make the different quests depending on your party. The different quests can be more enticing or more meaningful to different PCs, and that's where you make the basis of which do I choose to even tell them about, right? And I think the book does a really piss poor job of saying any of that. And the flow chart is a linear: do chapter 1, then do chapter 2, then do chapter 3.
Like,
That's not
that's called a table.
They've done that a bunch with some
Yeah.
adventures where they give you a flowchart.
I know. It's so
Like,
bad.
it worked well. It worked
Yeah,
well in
but
Storm
then-
King's Thunder.
I mean, it's
but,
not. It just says
Yeah.
Yeah.
they could have done that so much better. They could have. So here's the thing. The problem is that this is a sandbox adventure, and I'm having no problems running this, right? Because that's how I typically run my games, is very sandboxy. And so I already have it under my set of tools in my wheelhouse, how to sort of put the stopper on giving them new information that wants them to go to a different place or wants them to attempt a different quest, right? And I already can rein that in and only give them exactly what they need to make a choice. And then once they've made a choice about which of the 2 or 3 quests that are presented, which they're going to do, and my group already understands that if they say they're going to finish the first one and then attempt to go do one of the others, I'm not going to give them something in between that's going to distract them, right? Because that's just how it works. And the other thing that is a problem with this adventure, because they didn't give a flowchart, they didn't give anyone a very nice depiction of, here's all the links from chapter 2 into the chapter 1 things, so that you could hint things in chapter 1 about stuff in the future, or so that you can call back to chapter 1 things by the time they get to chapter 2, and it makes them feel like they were successful and they accomplished something. And what to hint about Sunblight in chapters 3 and 4. They don't do any of that. And as Mike knows, I read the adventure cover to cover before I did anything. And because I'm used to running sandboxes, and when I read each town, I said, okay, this is interesting to me, and it relates to my player's backstory, the PC's backstory, so I can hint this, and I want them to meet this person who can tell them this, right? Mm-hmm. And then go to the next town. Okay, does this even sound interesting at all? Does it relate to anybody's backstory? Does it relate to any other town? Does it relate to Sunblight? If no, who gives a crap about that? Like
Mhm.
it might even be a cool quest, but if it doesn't relate to anything, right now it goes at the bottom of the list. And then move on, right? And that's kind of how I went through, and that's how I decided what to do. Now, of course, the players are the ones determining in game what they actually do, but they also know that if they find out something and they don't go back and finish that quest, either
It's over. Yeah.
it's going to end and nobody resolved it, so those individuals died or whatever, or they just don't, like, they're not successful at it, so they might get a bad reputation, right? And some quests they shouldn't get right off the bat because they're too hard at first level or second level.
Yeah.
But the reasoning for that isn't just that, oh, it's too hard for them, so I'm not giving it to them. It's that nobody tells them about that particular situation because they don't have a reputation yet. Nobody in 10 towns knows that they're the ones that could solve that problem yet, so they don't get that information even if they go to that town.
Mhm.
Right. So a fundamental problem with this book is that they didn't give any bit of advice about how to take the 10 quests in the beginning and the 25 things that
I
you
think
can
it's
do in
actually
chapter,
13 quests. Yeah.
whatever. But yeah, because the cold open and then the chewingas and all that. But
Yeah.
like
But
all
there's
of the
two
things
quests in East Haven.
there, and then in chapter 2 they don't give any advice about, hey, here's how to actually use this information. They just
Or here's
assume you're
one
going to,
way, right? Like here's an
yeah,
option.
right, here's an option and here's how we determine this, right? And they don't do any of that.
Right.
So it doesn't surprise me at all if anybody has a problem with this
Mhm.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's just, it's
So
not
would you say that
well
I mean
organized.
is it it sounds like one of the main differences between the way I've run it and the way you've run it is that you had a tighter control over which quests were available to them. You held back quests and made sure that they only had so many in front of them regardless of what towns they're traveling to. They only had so many that were in front of them at any given time.
Right. So I gave them 3 quests in
Yeah.
the very beginning, right? They learned about the murder, right? So they got the cold open.
Yep.
Okay. And I knew they weren't going to complete that for at least 2 or 3 sessions because of the way that I set it up. They were going to be forced to go to 2 different towns before they get enough information to actually solve it, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And they're not going to, I under no circumstances are they going to run into Sefik and Torga, right? Spoilers, by the way, for anybody watching, we give
Oh, we're
spoilers.
we're beyond that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is that if they were ever going to a town where I knew Sefik and Torga were, they wouldn't actually meet them in that town. They would pass them on the road,
Mhm.
right? So they might see them or whatever, but they're not going to have any interaction with them for at least 3 sessions. So I kind of put that in so that that could be a long running thing, but I knew they couldn't resolve it at first,
Here's
Sure.
my
right?
question.
And then I gave,
We're talking
yeah,
about Sam's game now, and Mike's time is gone
yeah,
30,
yeah.
30
Start my
minutes. Should
timer.
we
It's
start
fine.
Sam's timer?
Yeah,
No, this counts as time. Yeah, this
Okay,
is
I'll
Sam's
start my
start
time.
Sam's
timer. It's fine.
timer.
So what I did was I gave them that first, the cold open, right? I also had them meet Velen Harpel, one of the main other people, right? Because I knew that they were going to need to have to talk to her later because they need to know about the Arcane Brotherhood, because they need to eventually have some kind of interest in Yithrin, right? And even though that's way far out in chapter 7, they need to
Sure.
start learning about that
Yeah.
early so that by the time it shows up, it's not just a what the hell's going on? It's a, oh, this is what's going on. Now we know why this person was there, right? So I made that NPC an important NPC that they may work with or they may work against or they may trust or they may not trust, for whatever. And I had her give them the Chewinga quest, and the reason I did that is they may or may not find the Chewingas, but this is her testing them to see if they are worthy of her attention, right?
Mhm.
Because if they actually aren't worthy of her attention, she's not going to offer them help, right? And so, and how do they interact with her? So I gave them those 2 things. So I gave them both the cold open and the Chewinga quest, but I knew they weren't going to resolve those right away. So they're kind of quests that are in process but not going to be resolved. And then I gave them information that led them, because they started in Targos, and I gave them information because of the murder that led them back to Bryn Shander. Because the first quest I wanted them to actually do is either the Moose quest in Lonelywood or the Foaming Mugs in Bryn Shander. Okay, because I needed them to investigate the Moose because of the Elven tomb that's in the Lonelywood. Okay,
Right.
it wasn't about the Moose. They might not because the moose probably would have killed them at first
Pumpkin
level.
spice mummy.
It's the pumpkin spice mummy, right?
Yeah.
So, so once again, notice I'm working in the Arcane Brotherhood right at the beginning.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with the ties, by the way. I've got all kinds of deep ties for mind flayers and for the Netheries.
Yeah, and I quickly worked in Torog.
The Arcane Brotherhood's already wired in. I've got lots of foreshadowing.
Right. So the thing is, like, so the quests I gave them, I forced them to learn about the murders. So that's the first quest. They got the Chewinga quest, but I didn't really consider that because that's just so that they could meet.
Yeah, I kind of would.
Yeah. No. It's a dump. I didn't do it. It's just not. It's not in the style that it's. If there's a really deep moment, they might end up running into some Chewingas because they're kind of cute, and my party likes that kind of stuff, right? But it's not about actually completing that quest. It was more about giving them a reason to meet Velen Harpel because she was looking for some Chewingas, right? And so then I gave them foaming mugs. And I gave them the choice for Lonelywood. I told them about the moose. Okay. They learned about the moose because they were in a tavern in Targos, and one of the Reghead tribesmen in my party was talking about how the reason he's in 10 towns instead of out with his tribe is that his tribe is starving because they can't find any more elk to hunt. And one of the drunk patrons in the bar, in the tavern, said, "Oh, I know why there's no elk, because the moose is leading them all the way because he wants all the 10 towners to die. And that moose killed my brother." And the guy's crying and drinking and all this stuff, right? So that was the perfect opening for me to give them any quest. Notice, any quest I could have given them because they're in a tavern, and I didn't have to tell them. I chose not to give them the Targos quest because the quest they got in Targos was the cold open. And if I gave them the Targos quest, they have to go to like 5 other towns to go through to get to Kelvin's Cairn. But I don't want them to go to Kelvin's Cairn yet. I want them to spend time in
Targos quest is an easy one to skip.
Yeah, it's easy to skip, and you don't even have to.
And there's nothing really. Well, there's nothing really there other than getting killed.
And you've already talked
to get to Kelvin's Cairn at some point.
You've both already talked about how the Chapter 1 quests don't really drive the rest of the main stories.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
The point I'm trying to make is...
I know Mike said it.
The point I'm trying to make is that you can make those quests matter, because what you do is you seed in backstory elements, and you seed in different... Like, the Unseen is the only quest in Chapter 1 that actually has Duergar in it fully. That's the point of the quest. And I seeded Duergar into almost every other place, so they could accidentally stumble into Duergar or hear about Duergar, because those Duergar are becoming a menace.
So
right?
Is it?
And in fact,
go ahead. I was gonna say, is it fair to say that the Chapter 1, the real goal of the Chapter 1 quest, other than obviously mechanically to level people up so they can get to the other stuff later, the real goal of Chapter 1 quests is the setting building. You're building not only the setting of Tin Towns, but the setting of the events of what's going on.
Right. Getting to know.
You want to know the real deal about the goal of Chapter 1? The goal of Chapter 1 is to make your players love Tin Towns, so that when the dragon comes and tries to destroy it, they care enough to chase it down and try to fight it. That's the real goal of Chapter 1. It's to level them up.
Any quests that aren't going to get you to that, you can cut.
Right. Yeah.
But there's really not many quests that take you to that. Like not that specific one. So there's there are lots of opportunities to seed in Chapter 2 and later things inside it. So like the Mind Flayer Psy Crystal in Tourmaline leads clearly to the Descendant quest in Chapter 2. The White Moose and a couple of the other ones show the awakened animals, which all sort of tie into Oral's attempt to try to push society away. Right? You got to do a little bit of yoga in order to, draw those connections together. And they're in the southern towns. They definitely have clear ties to the Duergar, but none of the northern stuff does.
Right.
You can add it.
But East Haven has it. Right. And so the thing is that East Haven is also the hub of the cult. Right. So For me, in my game, this is how.
Yeah. Well, right. So what is like we could do all kinds of things when we're making up ourselves, but I paid $50.
Right. No, and I'm not saying that you're wrong about that. Like here's my thing I've been saying for like 2 or 3 years now, maybe even longer, is all of these big ass 320-page hardback adventures, right? They could actually be shorter. You don't need as much adventuring material in there. You don't. You really don't. Instead, what you could do is take couple, 2-3 pages per chapter and make that into sidebars and tips and hints on how to run this damn adventure.
Honestly, like
for everybody, for novice DMs, for intermediate, and for expert.
Because a lot of the things that they're going to your point, like they're detailing a lot of specific locations and adventures and quests and whatever. But if you look at like the faction quest in Dragon Heist, you got like a blurb, like there was a paragraph, and I'd run a whole session on that, right? And that was enough, right? I think you're right. For some of those things, they could cut down the page count for some of the locations and the adventures and whatever, because without the advice, without the sidebars, without the explanation and the meta sort of discussion of the whole thing, you're making every adventure hard mode to DM anyway. You know, and so not having the details for every quest isn't the thing that's making it hard mode. It's figuring out how it all goes together is the hard mode part at this point.
Right. And the thing is that because the way that Rime is presented, it presents it as here are separate quests. And it shouldn't present it as that. It should say, hey, this quest, Foaming Mugs, can be related to the unseen this way. And you got 3 sentences there, right? Or it can be related to the Black Swords thing in wherever, because maybe, right. And or it could be related to Lonelywood because maybe, whatever. Like they could totally make 3 sentences to say that, hey, from Foaming Mugs, here's what they learned from those 3 dwarfs that they just saved and brought the ingots back to, right? Here's what they can learn. And that's going to lead your party to one of these 3 quests, your choice. Or how about choose one that's going to appeal to your players, or you choose one that actually addresses something in the background of one of the players, right? If one of the players is the background that they they're a worshiper of Levistus, you're going to want to do that Black Swords Castle quest, right? Because those are Levistus people, and you want your character to interact with, you want your PC to interact with them. That's going to be meaningful to that person. But if you don't have anything to do with Levistus, like none of my people have anything really to do with Levistus that impacts the game very much. So that's basically left out because I replaced Asmodeus with Torog, and I don't need Levistus in there because I have the Cult of Oral, so I don't need another cult, so like I changed those things, but I did it very intentionally because of certain goals that I had. But the book didn't tell me to do that. It didn't tell me how to do it. It didn't tell me how to connect any of those individual quests with other quests, and they could easily have done that. That's why I say that thing about the stupid flowchart. Don't even call that thing a flowchart. It's a so reduced table of contents with colored boxes.
It serves no
purpose. But that's been true of all of their adventures.
Right.
The funny thing is they got really good accolades once for doing it with Storm King
and it was good.
And they said, "Oh, we're going to do this in all of them," and they did it in every one.
And
of them.
And all of them are just straight lines. So what's the point?
Think about that. Think about that page, right? I could take a 2-sentence. I could take each quest, and I could write the 3 prongs. Okay, you can connect it to this quest or this quest or this quest. In 2 sentences, I could fill up that page that's wasted on their quote flowchart, right? Their flowchart should do that for me because Mike paid $50 for the book. Damn it, right?
So one thing that occurs to me, and I'm sorry to jump in on Sam's time, but
no, do it.
So one thing that occurs to me is like. And it would be a ton of work to do it, so it's not great. But like making this thing level faster, so that half of the quests in 10 towns are your 1st to 4th level, and the other half are tier 2, right? And then blend that into chapter 2, so that you can actually make this a up to tier 3 quest. Because 2 of the other problems I have is like, hey, we built this enormous Chardalon town destroying dragon. Oh, it's got like 112 hit points. Yeah, right. It's like a CR6. And then like, oh, my favorite. God, this drives me bananas. right? Is you read it. Disclaimer: the windswept tundra of Icewind Dale is the true test of one's mettle. Blah 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 blah. Where is it? The Dark Antlers. Icewind Dale is the frost maiden, the frostbitten end of the world. You can't spell dice without, my friend. And the frost maiden is not some demon prince, vampire, lich, beholder, crime lord, or archdevil. She is a god and a cold-hearted one. Yeah, she'll get one-shotted by a paladin with radiant damage. Right. She's so underpowered for a god. But if she was tier 3 or tier 4 and she's CR 18, now we'd be talking, right? But
well, the structure
they compress the levels so much.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is,
too much material for too few levels.
Right, and you can actually the way they have you level is kind of funky, right? Because I gave my PCs encountered some winter wolves and some emaciated other wolves going into Targos when they very first got there. So they didn't know anything about anything, and they had that, and that's what leveled them from 1 to 2 because they defeated those emaciated wolf pack, right? And so even at level 1 they could do that, and it was very dangerous for them because it was a winter wolf with a full strength breath, right? But they actually succeeded. They went right up to level 2, so they didn't even do anything other than one combat, and they got to level 2.
Yeah.
And then I put them up to level 3 after the second session. So they had only completed one quest, and I put them to level 3. But then they sat in level 3, and I had told them, I had warned them that I'm going to level them really fast at first because they need to be a little more hardy to survive. And then they're going to be moving around and doing kind of some smaller quests, and they're going to stay level 3 for a while. Yeah. Then I leveled them to level 4, and as soon as they got to level 4, I started seeding in things from chapter 2, even though they had only really completed like 3 quests from chapter 1 so far at that point. Because now that they can move across the tundra, because they got some dogs and sleds, now they can move across the tundra, they can actually encounter things from chapter 2, and those things can be clues to either Sunblight or Ithrin or how to defeat Oral, or they can be clues back to something that is going to be learned when they get into back into one of the 10 towns, right?
Yeah.
But the only reason I can do that is, number 1, I'm used to running sandboxes like this, and number 2, I read the whole damn thing before I even ran the game. Before I did session 0, I read the entire thing, and I already had in my mind, here are how these things are connected. And then when I did session 0 and I learned the PC's backgrounds and their secrets, then I groomed it even more, right? Like one of my PCs is the runaway author, right? And one of the PCs is a person who's actually is running away from their family of nobles from Waterdeep and Neverwinter. And of course, the reason that the runaway author, they didn't know what each other's secret was, right? We didn't do open secrets. They are actual secrets.
Yep.
First.
And so
I could easily say, okay, well, either in Bryn Shander, which is one of the larger cities, or in East Haven, there's going to be a bookshop where they're going to carry the book that runaway author wrote, right? And if anybody hears that runaway author's name, they're going to say, hey, I saw your book in the bookstore. And that way I could get their backstory in there, and then that's going to lead to all kinds of strife, right? So since I knew I wanted to, right, I wanted to work that in, so I now could I could slot that into my own flow chart, right? Based on the character backgrounds and secrets. And I have 2 Reghead tribesmen in my party, and I worked in there's something in chapter 2 where you run into one of the Reghead encampments, right? And then there's one of the another thing I don't like about this is the tests of Oral. When you get into her house and you're supposed to go through her tests, and it goes through all this, this is really real. The PCs are really, really there. But like, it's really just this dumb test. When they finish it, they get back to her house somehow. Like, that's basically a dream sequence, but they don't want to admit it's a dream sequence, right? So like, I hate those. I didn't like that part of it, because then if they don't succeed, some druids show up and let them in anyway, so it's dumb. But anyway, so those parts. But one of those quests is like a preservation quest where they come upon a Reghead camp that has been ravaged, and all the Reghead tribesmen have been killed except for one young kid who was the son of the clan leader or whatever, but he's a chosen of Oral, which is why he can withstand the weather, and he hid in a snowbank or something, and they didn't see him, so they slaughtered his whole clan. So here's the thing. when my party ran into the Reghead encampment in chapter 2 as they're coming across the tundra, they met that kid and his parents, and they know why that tribe was out there, and they know everything that's happening because that tribe is trying to break off from the larger tribe because the tiger clan and the elk clan or whatever are fighting because they both think they're chosen of Oral, and so the elk clan has become cannibals. Like, there's all this stuff going on that's in the book that's sort of hinted at here and there that you could fit into these areas. And so because I have tribesmen in my group, I chose to use those. So I put that there. So now they know the kid and his family. Later on, they're going to find him by himself and the rest of his clan having been destroyed. And that's going to motivate them more to go after Oral because it's her fault that that happened, right? So I couldn't do that if I hadn't read the whole book and read. And when I say, I mean, I had to read the creature entries too, because if you don't read the entry about Bell and Harpel and Nas Lantimer
right.
and all that, and if you don't read the creature entries about crag cats and the cold light walkers, and if you don't read the entries about the Ceramorphs and about the Reghead tribes, it's really hard to seed all that stuff back into those quests because the book doesn't do a good job of saying this might be important if your party has this background or if your party has one of these types of characters. It doesn't do any of
And
that. A really good organizational layout could do
I'm
that
hearing
for
very
you.
clearly that my initial instinct to not really be very interested in this adventure, and then I got interested in it as you all were talking about getting started, and now it's sounding more and more like, no, I need to treat it like Tomb of Annihilation and just tear things out of it that I want to use in other campaigns, and that'll,
Let me
I think, go
let me be
well.
very clear. Let me be very clear. I love this adventure. This adventure is right up my alley. It is perfectly suited to the way I love to run a game and the way that I prep and the way that I consume an adventure, the way I read it and prep for it. It works perfectly for me, and this is how I've been doing things for a really long time. So for me, like Mike was on the Discord earlier saying, "Oh, here's what I'm having trouble with. Oh, I didn't understand this, or oh, I don't know that." And it's like for me, I'm like, "Oh yeah, this is this and this and this and this," because this is my wheelhouse. This is second
Right,
nature
but
to me.
your wheelhouse
But it
is
makes me really
your
sad.
wheelhouse is you never run published adventures, so that, you don't get
Right.
help. You're
So
not used to that.
no, you're right. You're right. So one that's really loosey goosey
Uh
and
huh.
doesn't have a ton of connections, and I have to make those connections myself. That's exactly right. That's right at my wheelhouse. However, because I'm basically running it. The quests that are in there, everything is run as written for the quests. The only thing I added was the Colt, and I changed Asmodeus to Torog. And I'm making the connections where the book doesn't
Right.
describe connections. I'm giving more clues, more letters from Nildar and Dirth and Zardarok, and more things got stolen in different towns by the Dwergar and stuff like that. Those things I added because they make sense based on what the Dwergar are supposedly doing, right? Which the book doesn't
Right.
do that. It only puts them in one town, which is
And
dumb.
it's worth noting
Yeah, I don't
for
recommend it.
anybody who is
Yeah.
listening,
I'm on the
or for
opposite
anybody who's
side.
listening or watching this, though, it is worth noting that if you want to integrate the Cult of Oral, Sam has a fantastic product at DM's Guild, and you can buy that, and that is all about the Cult of Oral. Never stop plugging, right, Mike?
Yeah. It's
Never
called
stop
the
plugging.
it's called the Creed of Oral, and it's $4.99. It's about 24 pages, and it's actually a silver
Nice,
bestseller now.
nice.
Yeah, it's
So
good
Good
stuff.
job.
Yeah,
yeah.
All right.
yeah. That just I know you got to talk about
I
your
was
game at
saying,
the end of the 3
at
seconds.
some point, 50,
I need a
50 do I
3-second
get 50
rebuttal.
minutes as well?
And sure. My rebut. Yeah, I was thinking about it today, and I'm like, I don't think I recommend it. Like, I don't think I recommend this adventure, and the reason why is I it's got a lot of interesting material. A lot of the quests are cool. It's a beautiful book. It's got a kind of a lot of neat things, but I'm running into a lot of problems just in chapter 1, and I already know I'm going to be running into a bunch of problems in chapters 3 and above with things like super weak
Right.
oral, and like I don't want to just randomly destroy towns
Now,
and all kinds of other problems that I'm going to run into later that I know I'm going to run into. It's taking far more work for me to wrangle this thing than it is to
Now
run
that
otherwise.
said, with my current adventure, my current campaign, my adult one, I am leaning heavily on tearing things out of other adventures and using them. and particularly high level stuff. And so now I'm thinking, oh, I should probably go look at the oral stuff and the Nethery City stuff and see if there's stuff I can tear out of there and use in my current campaign as well. I think we're gonna make them stop now and give me my 15 minutes, because we normally try to 15 minutes.
Make sure to stay on
15
time,
minutes each should mean that the whole show is 45 minutes, and we're over 50 now. So I'm going to get my time in. But before I do, I didn't get a chance to do my little interstitial between Mike's and Sam's time. So let me remind folks, if you want to support the show, go to patreon.com/The Tome Show. Become a patron, $1 a month if you can. Help us out, and that's how I'm paying the bills and what have you for the show at this point. We're just trying to make enough money to pay for our hobby, right? And if you want to find us on social media, we are at The Tome Show on Twitter. We have a Facebook. We have a Discord, which is actually linked in the Twitter description. I don't know. Where else are we? I don't know. Is Google Plus still a thing? We're probably still there. So...
I don't believe
MySpace. Do we have a MySpace? I don't know. So anyway, my game or my games. I'm running the 2 games. Last time we chatted, my campaign that I called Deep Darkness, which was Dragon Heist into Curse of Strahd, and now they're back, and my Act 3 is the dark powers from Curse of Strahd have been released into the world, and they've all chosen champions, and they've got to hunt them down and figure out what to do with them all, and they haven't really figured out what to do with them all now. So far, they've hunted down and killed a few of the champions, but what they haven't been confronted with the fact that killing the champions doesn't really do much, because the dark powers will just pick new ones. But they're figuring some things out. They're coming to some realizations. But when we last chatted, they were in... I ripped the 2 of the 9 gods out of Tomb of Annihilation, and they were in there and approaching the end of it. And that was... Acererak was the champion of the dark power Tenebris, which is like the dark power of liches, right? So that kind of made sense. And so last time I was asking you all about... they were just about to confront the hags, the Sohn sisters, right before the final big battle with Acererak. And so I was getting some advice on how do you like, all of these like super weak hags seem super weak when you're about to go up against something big bad for being at the bottom of this dungeon or whatever. But
did you use the blasphemies of
while we were chatting, I went and bought the blasphemous whatever it is, those spells.
Blasphemies of
that's Rob Schwab converted a bunch of Shadow of the Demon Lord spells into 5th edition, and so I threw a bunch of those at him, and so that was particularly nasty for them to deal with, right? And they were appropriately grossed out from the handful of spells that they were able to pull off from there, and so that had the narrative impact that I wanted it to have. And then they got into the cradle, right, with the Atropol there, and I did not want to follow the adventure because, first of all, they're a little bit higher level, so I didn't want to be like, you fight the baby for a while and you beat up on the Soulmonger, and then Acererak shows up to get his revenge. So it was like they had like 2 rounds. I did it by time. They had 2 rounds to futz with the Atropol and the Soulmonger, and then Acererak and his Sphere of Annihilation show up.
Two rounds at high level is like an hour and 20 minutes.
No, it wasn't that long. Because we got through the hags and the Soulmonger room and all the rest of the stuff until they were out of the tomb all in one session. But the fight with Acererak went really well. I did the quick, I think the adventure suggests you start with just a time stop, and he throws up some defensive spells and whatever. And then I also had him teleport away, so he was at that ledge where the portal was to the next area, but that has no pathway to get to it. So he's over there tossing spells, and there, the druid is wild.
He didn't have a You didn't have a barbarian suplex him into the
Right? No,
lava.
no. The druid wild shaped into a monkey to sort of climb over there, and other people were like misty stepping to and trying to squeeze into this little balcony with them. And the advantage of playing on Roll20 is that I can see exactly where everybody's hit points are. So as soon as that one character who was kind of being a pain to him dropped to literally 99 hit points, right?
Oh.
I described it, and this was I loved this moment. I described it as a Serac looks in your face, and the rotting flesh stretches on the edges of his mouth as he opens his mouth, stares at you, and says, "Die," and you do.
Yeah.
No save, no attack, just.
I've pulled that.
Yeah, he just says die, and you do.
Yeah.
But I also knew that they had prepared, like they had a revivify spell and a ring of spell storing, and somebody ready to cast it. So they had that prepped and ready to go. I knew that wasn't gonna.
Did you beef up his off turn spells?
Yeah, no, I think
So
I don't
actually,
remember
like,
exactly what all of your advice was, but I followed a bunch of. I followed a lot of your advice. Yeah.
being able to throw fireballs and lightning bolts as legendary actions. Was
Yeah, I didn't.
Instead of knocking.
I didn't do all of them, but I did some of them. Some of those things, yeah. So
that's when he's dropping 3 fireballs off his turn. Like that gets scary fast.
no, absolutely. But so eventually they defeated him, and the way I've been introducing items that are like the vestiges of divergence from Critical Role. Right, so they kind of level up with you as you hit certain sort of story milestones, right? And so the character who really wanted a Serac dead is the character whose backstory was, I was just a happy halfling, ghostwise halfling living in Methwood, and some necromancer showed up and slaughtered my entire village, including my wife and daughter, right? And so he's been hunting this necromancer this whole time, and the necromancer was a Serac, and the soul of his wife and daughter are in the soulmonger. And so when they destroy the soulmonger, it was this big moment of you see this like Ghostbusters flood of souls streaming up through the ceiling, and just for a moment you see the soul of your wife and daughter turn and look at you and smile and then go on to their final rest or whatever, right? But then the instead of the staff of the staff of the Forgotten One that a Serac uses, I had him have this sort of long wand with a sort of a silver skull-topped wand that he was using instead, and made that one of the vestiges of divergence specifically for this halfling, because it was a big milestone character moment for him. So of course he's the one that gets this special one, and he's a halfling, so this long wand becomes a cane, a skull-topped cane for him. And so that worked out really well. He has this sort of voodoo theme going on. The character does. He wears the ratty top hat and paints the skull image on his face and does all of that kind of stuff, right? So it all played out really well. That whole thing went down brilliantly. And then I kind of expected them to go back to Waterdeep and to take a break, right? Rest, get back to Waterdeep. The druid has picked up tree stride, so that's how they're getting around. I figured they'd go back to the Trollskull Manor, take a break, and it was going to be this nice light conclusion to the session, because the stuffy paladin of the party has been trying to lighten up, and so he had secretly in game weeks ago in the real world, like 6 months ago, he arranged this with me that he was going to have painters come in and paint this mural of the sort of dark, edgy loner character riding a pink unicorn surrounded by rainbows and hearts and butterflies and whatever, and all the characters sort of fawning around them, right? And so this was going to be the moment. They're going to get back from the tomb, and the mural's going to be done. And I commissioned a bunch of art for the show from J. Sloan, and I figured, hey, while I'm doing this, let me throw a little extra at you. And I commissioned her to actually draw the mural for me. So I was they emailed me the art of the mural the same night we were playing that session. So I'm like, that timing could not have been better. And then all of a sudden the halfling's like, So now that this is done, I want to go back to Methwood and finally do the rites and services to put my family to rest. So we're going to go straight there and not to Waterdeep. So I had to sit on that mural artwork that I had gotten for like 2-3 weeks, just desperately wanting to show them this awesome piece that they put together for the group. But I held out, and then they went to Methwood. They did these rites, but I had this whole. I figured out, because I was thinking, like, they're higher level now. They're like 14th level at this point, and there's not a lot written that I can use for published materials for that high of level of characters, except Candlekeep Mysteries has been out a little while now. And so I started looking at the higher level adventures there and which ones can I use. And so it kind of made sense that I could use the Xanthoria, which is actually the highest level adventure from Candlekeep Mysteries. I didn't tie any. I've now introduced 3 of them, and none of them are tied to Candlekeep. But you're in Methwood, in the ruins of the village where your family died and whatever, and the entire place is infested with this plague of fungus, right? And so they went and investigated and found the cave where Xanthoria was, and they found Xanthoria, and it was this kind of sad moment. I don't know if you're familiar with that adventure, but the idea behind Xanthoria is that she is a lich that has figured out a way to bind her soul to another living creature, and that living creature can basically just choose to not ever take damage. And so they find this crying little sprite or pixie or whatever it is, Thunderwing, at the beginning of the dungeon, who's like super sad and doesn't have all of her memories and doesn't know what's going on, and follows them along all the way to the end, where they figure out that the only way to finally defeat Xanthoria and destroy her phylacteries is if Thunderwing chooses to die. And so there's this moment, this really sad moment, where they have to like have this heartbreaking scene of like, So Thunderwing, we have to have this conversation, and this is not easy because you've been this cute little sprite that's been hanging out with us, and you're super sweet, and oh, that's so sad, right? And it was appropriately sort of heartbreaking, in the way that, like, I was a little worried because, like, this can go to a dark place. Like, you're affected.
Yeah. Heartbreaking in an
okay
way.
It was heartbreaking in an okay way, but I mean, you're potentially dealing with effectively suicide, right? And that can be a touchy subject to be delving into. But it went well. They put the spirit of the wife and daughter to rest, as well as Thunderwing and her friends that died in Xanthoria's experiments. And then they finally went back to Waterdeep, and I got to introduce them to the mural and all of that. But then inside of Xanthoria's sort of little dungeon there in her lab is where I'd introduced the one Candlekeep book from Candlekeep Mysteries. It's the only one I'm actually using the book, which is the Appendix of Alcazar. But I changed the location a little bit because I've got one character that I'm like, he needs a little bit of spotlight time, and he's originally from Rashomon, so I'm going to move the location of this whole thing so that it's not all in the Anarok Desert, and we're going to move some of it to Rashomon, and it's tied to sort of his homeland and give him some spotlight time. But the other one that I'm tying in is friend of the show, Brenda Stoddard, wrote an adventure called The Scrivener's Tale. And it's about a book that has an archfey, an evil archfey trapped inside of it that was exiled from the Winter Court or the Gloaming Court by the Queen of Air and Darkness and trapped in this book so that the Queen wouldn't have to deal with her shenanigans anymore. So when the character who died from the Power Word Kill from Acererak, she is my player who is the creative writer and super creative and constantly like taking our things and putting and writing sort of narratives, right? Writing, she's going to compile it all into a massive book at some point, right? And so she wrote like an epic poem describing her experience dying. And I'm like, can we collaborate a little bit and you can tweak some of that? And because she was describing like, I died and I met death. And I'm like, how about you died and you met somebody who you think is death, but it's actually there's these little hints and cues and whatever that it's actually the princess of Shadowglass, which is the big villain of the Scrivener's Tale. And instead of them finding the book, I'm saying that the Queen of Air and Darkness destroyed the book so that she could never be freed. And so the Princess of Shadowglass is like rode her soul back to the world, and the book is appearing on her flesh as she. So the idea of the original is that you open the book and you get a mark. And the mark sort of progresses, and if it gets all the way to tier 5, you turn into glass. But otherwise, every other tier, there's some benefits and some drawbacks and whatever, right? But I also added, like, not only do you gain these drawbacks and benefits, but every time it increases in tier, more of the story appears on your skin and slowly covers your body. And so you are the book now in the world that is trapping the Princess of Shadowglass. And so after she failed the second save and more of the story appeared, and she got the drawback of potions no longer affect her. And that's when they're like, oh, well, no, this is serious. We should probably deal with this next. And figure out what the heck is going on. And it was around the same time that they get attacked by agents of the Queen of Air and Darkness, because she doesn't want the princess to escape, right? So if I can just kill her, the book is gone again, and no problem. So they got attacked in Trollskull Manor, and and so that was all. But they decided that they needed to deal with that. So I skipped the whole. There's a Baldur's Gate element of the original story. I completely skipped that and just gave them the clues. They did the research. They're high enough level, whatever. They found the information about where the ruins are, the Haven of the Red Quill, it's called. And so they got down into it. They explored a little bit. They found the ghost of the author of the book who filled them in on a little bit more of the backstory and what's going on. Meanwhile, the Princess of Shadowglass is also whispering in her head, and oh, don't listen to that guy, he's a big liar, you need to get in there and free me, otherwise unfortunately you're going to turn to glass, sorry, there's nothing I can do about it, the only way to stop you from dying is if you free me, right? Whoops. What are you going to do, right? But of course she doesn't actually care. And so that's actually where we left off. We were about halfway through. They figured out that in order to get into the ritual room to free the Princess of Shadowglass, they needed to get the 3 keys from the statues. And then I'm like, and now we're going to stop, even though like we still have half an hour left of our normal game session time, because that encounter is like, it's one of those where you try to get the key from the statue, and of course it animates and starts attacking. But it animates and starts attacking, and all of the scholars who used to be in this dungeon also animate, and there's like an endless supply of mummies that appear. And then once you destroy the statue and get the key, the next statue animates and more of these mummies appear. And then the next one a few rounds later. And so I'm like, this is one of those encounters that like, it feels like it's going to be a quick little kill a handful of things, and it's like, no, it's one encounter after another encounter after another encounter with no breaks in between. I don't want to start that with half an hour left of our game session. And so that's actually where we stopped last time. My time is up, and I think this is happening a lot. I didn't get to talk about Descent into Avernus. I've been running that with the boys. The Evantier bundle with all kinds of advice on how to run it has continued to be just fantastic. I didn't have super high expectations, because I'm like, I've run a lot of adventures, I know how things run and how to tweak things and how to change things pretty well, but it'll be interesting to see somebody else's take on it, right? And it is really good, and I'm finding myself using it way more than I thought I would. And so, long story short, they freed Kostachi a month ago, and this month they got to the Bleeding Citadel, they got through the Scab, and they went through Idelglin, which took 2 sessions, and now we concluded the adventure with, and then you claim the sword, and that was the end of that. So anyway,
cool. That
was me in a nutshell.
So I find it funny that you mentioned Tomb of Annihilation earlier when you said that you you're thinking about Rime in the same way that you are thinking of
Mm-hmm.
using Tomb, where you pull things out and don't run the whole thing. And Tomb of Annihilation is my other favorite fifth edition
Right.
adventure that I've run. And the reason that I chose these two to run is because they're very
Right.
sandboxy and,
Well, my
and it's very clearly, a style that I
yeah.
like. And,
My issues with Tomb aren't the sandboxy nature of it. It's the ticking
yeah,
time bomb and now go explore. It's the
yeah,
exploration adventure
right,
that
right.
turns into a death
Yeah,
trap dungeon.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Right. And
yeah,
we've
yeah,
talked about all that before,
Yeah.
but I'm just pointing out that the whole first half of that adventure is very
Sandbox. Yeah.
similar in terms of where do they go, which quests do they
right.
get, how, what do they discover, where do they move around, and how do you plan that out
Yeah,
in your
although I
game?
feel like,
Yeah.
and maybe it's because of the nature of it being an exploration, a hex crawl sort of exploration, map exploration adventure. I feel like I don't feel the need for guidance on Tomb of Annihilation as much as I do for Rhyme.
Yeah, I didn't feel like I need as much work to run Tomb as I am, with as I don't think I had as hard a time running Tomb as I am running Frost Maiden. But I know other people that
Mm-hmm.
did. I know other people that
Mhm.
had the same problem of like, we have this big motivation to do this thing, and now we're just wandering around, getting lost in the
Mm-hmm.
swamp and running into weird stuff, like and
Mhm.
not having a clear tie of like, how is this helping us get to Omu,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
Right.
so I know other people had trouble with it. I didn't have it, and I like you, really. Tomb, I think, is my second favorite of the hardbacks,
Yeah.
next to Curse of Strahd.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, Jeff, do you find Descent into Avernus? I've heard a lot about when they get there and they're supposed to be traveling
Mm-hmm.
around hell, like that's a little bit sandboxy. And then, if you throw in like the elephant thing where she can't remember
Mm-hmm.
shit, right?
Yeah.
Like and all of that is sort of like, oh, here's these tools and now just have your party travel around. Like, does that feel to you like it's sandboxy, or does that is
Though
that
as written, it is not sandboxy at all. That said, this Evan Tiers bundle has like one of the things in this bundle is just a whole product of here's how to run that part as sandbox, and honestly, whether you run it like it says there or not, and seldom am I taking what's in there and just doing it, because some of it's also like, what if you don't want to have Lulu? Here's how you cut Lulu out and still get the parts you need, that kind of stuff.
right.
I really like Lulu. I think she's fun. Whatever. But even without just wholly embracing the how do you run it as a sandbox thing, because by the time I got the bundle, I was already like 3/4 of the way through that chapter. There was still a lot there to add to and the advice to take. There's like, oh, this is a good idea, and this is a more logical sort of order of things, and that makes like one of the things that I did in since the last time we chatted was there's a moment in one of the paths. This, as written, it's not a sandbox. It's here's two linear paths. You can follow either one, right? The only reason it doesn't play out that way was because they have to roll 2 dice anytime they're traveling from one location to another, and if it ever comes up as doubles, they accidentally end up in a different place. So at one point, they actually ended up hopping from one path to another path because they ended
Right.
up on another one, and they're like, "Oh, maybe, but if we do it this way, we don't have to make a deal with the devil. Let's do it this way." And that actually came up quite a bit because you're for parts of it you're rolling 2d4s, and if it comes up doubles, there's a decent chance that happens. But one of the things I really liked from this was that on one of the paths, the advice is you're going from the crypt of the Hell Riders, and the advice that you get from Olanthius, the NPC there, is go over to these arches, and you can teleport from there to anywhere you want in Avernus, and that's how you get to Kostachi to free him, which doesn't actually make a ton of sense because Avernus, they go out of their way to describe how Avernus is weird and time and space don't work right, and if you want them to get there faster, they just get there faster, right? There's no reason for them to have to suddenly teleport now when they haven't in any other times. But this bundle gives the advice of no. What if the arches are the only way to get to the Bleeding Citadel, which is why Zariel and her agents haven't found it anywhere in Avernus, because the only way to get there is through here, and you can't get through there unless you have the blessing or whatever of the guardian Olok, which is why they're called the Arches of Olok. And that was also fun because it was like 1 or 2 rounds teleported to each layer of hell until you can identify what layer of hell you're on. That was the Sphinx. Olok is a Sphinx, and that was the Sphinx's riddle. I'm going to ask you the same question. Was it 9 times? And you're going to have to answer it every time. And meanwhile, okay, now we're in this layer of hell, and there's stuff attacking you, and now you're in this layer of hell, and there's an avalanche, and there's coming down the mountain, and whatever, and so there's challenges at each one, and how long you're stuck there depends on how long it takes you to figure out what layer of hell you're in. And so that was a lot of fun, and I got that from the bundle as well. And so yeah, I've taken a lot from there. So I think it runs better.
Well, let me tell you why I sort of asked about Tomb of Annihilation and then Descent into Avernus, and with respect to the rhyme thing, because it seems to me that I feel like the designers at Wizards or the when they're planning out things, it feels to me like they felt like Rime of the Frost Maiden is a sort of natural. It's in the natural, so they start with Tomb of Annihilation. They have a little bit of sandboxy stuff, but then there's this major goal that you know about from the beginning, right, as written. And then there's also, Dragon Heist is kind of sandboxy, but you pick which villain and you pick which season or whatever. And then there's Avernus, which is, well, now you're telling me it's linear, but I was under the impression there was it's the only one I haven't read all of. So I was under the impression there was a lot of sandboxy elements to traveling around and everything. And then you get to Rime, which is kind of all of that put together.
I mean, right? I think you can follow the progression, but I think part of what they've been doing is they've been trying, because it's I think my decade or 2 or however many of looking at D&D adventures tells me it's really hard to write a good sandboxy adventure that has a strong story and whatever. And they've been I feel like if you follow the arc of 3rd edition adventures, at least the ones published by WotC and not that written by WotC, not the ones that they hired other studios to write, that you can kind of follow the through line. Like you can see the experimentation. You can see how they're kind of working on things and developing things and evolving things. And I appreciate that they're doing that, but it doesn't always hit. And they don't, their publishing schedule is such that I don't know if they don't have or don't take the time to go back and when they hear that something doesn't hit, going back and adjusting it. So. Well,
I mean, by the time they hear that something doesn't hit, they're already deep into designing the next thing where it's already done.
Or they're hearing it in playtest, and at playtest they're not looking to overhaul major things. They're looking to tweak.
Right. So I just think it's really interesting because I feel like it feels like a natural progression from how they started with Tyranny of Dragons, right, with the Horde of the Dragon Queen, Tyranny of Dragons, and moved to the Princes of the Apocalypse, and then Storm King's Thunder, and as you move through all those, ignoring the sort of Tales of the Yawning Portal and Saltmarsh, right, ignore those, but it feels like there's a progression that they were going for, and they're trying to use different elements in each book, and in a way, it feels like they think that's standing in for teaching you how to run that sort of adventure. But the thing is, it's not a stand-in for teaching you how to run that, right? Because you also don't know what else a DM has run. You can't assume that every DM that picks up Rime has run all the others and so learned all the lessons from all the others to be able to run Rime. So even though it seems like there's some kind of weird progression, it also... I don't remember what my point was. But you understand what I'm saying? That's why I was asking you about how you felt about Tomb of Annihilation and Descent and so on, because it feels like there's some kind of progression that they've been following, but yet it doesn't actually have this is what I was going to say. It doesn't have the payout that I feel like they feel like they should have, right? Because then they get to this sort of pinnacle of here's a sandboxy thing with lots of specific quests, and but it has this specific focus, and it's got these really cool creatures, and it's got this really great end game thing and all that, but yet it doesn't actually hit all the notes it's supposed to hit.
All right. Well, we have gone a good hour and 20 minutes now, and and there's all kinds of fantastic like conversation and questions in the chat this episode, and I'd love to talk about them, but it is bedtime. So unfortunately, Dave and Zellspell, we can totally talk about those questions sometime, but maybe shoot them to us in an email. Maybe we can. Those are the kinds of things that we can delve into deeper at some point, but it is clearly not going to be tonight because we all had lots of stuff to discuss. So. All right, so I think that's where we're going to stop things. This has been our May episode of Behind the DM Screen for 2021. I don't know. Find us on Facebook and Twitter is at The Tome Show, and Mike is at Sly Flourish, and I am at Squatch, Squach, and Sam is at DM Samuel on Twitter, and that's going to be where we end things. So say goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.
Bye, guys.